In today's episode, I am sitting down with a sex educator and therapist, and we are talking about the theology of sex within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and where our culture might not necessarily align with our doctrine. We're going to talk about ways that we can teach this to our children to evoke positive relationships with sex, and also talk about ways we can have better sex ourselves. Welcome to Blonde Apologist. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Blonde Apologist. I'm so thrilled for today. I have with me Tammy Hill.
Hello.
Tammy is a relationship and sexuality educator, as well as a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Utah. I was introduced to Tammy at BYU. I took her class. It was called Marriage Prep, and I'm not being dramatic when I say it changed my life. It was very influential. I continue to think about it often and take the curriculum from that class and apply it to my marriage. And when I started this podcast, I kind of wrote down a list of dream people who I need to have on, and Tammy was one of the first ones.
Thank you.
So I'm so thrilled that she's here today, and you guys are in for a treat as we talk about sex and the ways that we're supposed to view it the way God intended to.
Yes.
And I worry that this topic is often avoided in our church and is seen as very taboo, which creates a misunderstanding and often poor relationships with it. So that's the first thing that I want to discuss, Tammy, is help us understand. We believe sex, we believe it to be something that needs to be preserved for relationship between a husband and wife, and of course we uphold and we teach that to our youth. We teach it to single adults, but I worry that sometimes when we are putting so much restrictions on it and we're saying don't participate, people see it as a harmful or a bad thing. And then when they get into marriages, it's so hard to change that mindset into seeing it as this is a beautiful gift from God, when I've been told my whole life that, whoa, stay away. So help us understand, how can we change that mindset, and maybe even how should we be teaching it to better understand it?
Oh, Lauren, those are perfect questions, and I'm thrilled to be here. So, first of all, I have a book I published last year called Replenish, and the first two parts of that book really talk about this very thing that you're asking. I talk specifically about our sexual theology, and when I teach that, people often say, what? I said, well, actually, there's quite a bit we do know about sex from our theology. Is it all right if I go there?
Please go there.
Okay, so fundamentally, we understand that we're created in the image and function of heavenly parents. Men are created like our Heavenly Father, women are created like our Heavenly Mother. And when you pause and consider that we're created for pleasure. If you think of a women's whole clitoral complex, the only purpose we have it is for pleasure. And that sends such a big message to me that this is an important thing for our heavenly parents, that their daughters are experiencing pleasure.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me, right? Because I don't have to orgasm in order for us to create life.
Right.
And so its intention is not only to create life. That is what that tells me.
Well, and that's what my book is. We are told to multiply and replenish. And often in my lifetime, I've just kind of blended those together. We multiply and replenish and the earth. And I can remember probably, 10 years ago or so, in the temple and sitting there, and the animals multiply, but Adam and Eve were commanded to multiply and replenish.
Wow.
There is a huge difference. We are commanded to replenish, and I believe personally, I believe that that's talking to us about learning how to help one another achieve sexual pleasure together in marriage, and that through the joy and energy and goodness that comes from sexuality in marriage, you gain energy to go about doing the labors of family life, which are a heck of a lot.
Yep.
And so if couples are able to make this a priority, to really learn and understand, how can I help my wife feel fulfilled? How can I help my husband feel fulfilled? There's a sexual stewardship that we have in marriage where we're covenanting to share only our sexual selves with each other forever.
Yeah.
That means within this boundary of just two people is the only sphere that we can grow and develop sexually. There's a responsibility with that.
Yeah.
And just like any stewardship that we would have a calling or responsibility, we have a responsibility to show up sexually for ourselves and for our partners.
Yeah, I really love that. And that's such a good mindset to have too. Instead of seeing it as like, I don't know, it's not something on my to-do list that I have to do or like get done. It's like, this is an opportunity for us to replenish, to connect.
Mm-hmm.
At what age would you recommend us starting to have these conversations with our children?
Mm-hmm. I will be honest, I begin at birth. And people think that's a little crazy, but you were in my class. I'm sure I taught you the way I believe. As parents, a lot of times we have not been modeled. This has not been modeled to us, talking about sexuality in healthy ways. And we need to do it better for our children and for my grandchildren. We must do it better. And the way to do it better at talking about sex is to practice talking about sex. So if you hold that little baby in your arms and you are rocking them back and forth, you can talk about, you'll menstruate, and let me tell you what that means, and someday you might have an orgasm, and let me explain what that means, and ejaculation. You can take these big words and learn how to say them to this infant who doesn't know what you're saying but is being nurtured while you're talking. But you're getting, what it's doing is it's helping you hear yourself talk about sex.
Yeah, it's a practice for you.
Yeah, and you're learning, I don't know that I like the way I said that. Let's try that one more time, a different way. And so, but you're becoming comfortable talking about sex, and we must be more comfortable. It's part of the plan. We're created as sexual beings. We grow and mature sexually throughout life. I can remember speaking at Education Week years ago and having a woman say on the front row, I just wish that my kids wouldn't be sexual until their wedding night. And I just was taken back by that idea of, obviously this woman's afraid to talk about this. She's afraid her kids are going to screw up.
Yeah, and that's of course why it's avoided. Right? We are afraid that if we talk about it, what if we're encouraging it? What if they go and explore it to the extent where, well, now what?
And there's no research that backs that up. Actually, the research shows when parents are teaching sexual responsibility to their children, their sexual debut is extended. And so there's no research that would back up that fear.
Yeah, that's good.
So when we're practicing, when we're not doing something because we're afraid, we need to step back, or we're doing something because we're afraid, we need to step back and say, what is it that I'm afraid of? So this woman that said that, I thought, no, our children, we need to understand that our children are born with sexual body parts. As we grow and mature, by the age of 5, young males' brains are marinating in testosterone. They are interested in curvy things. It's how they are created.
Yeah.
And we need to just be comfortable with normalizing all of it and not making it so that we're afraid or they're ashamed for experiencing either sexual arousal or having sexual questions. That all of it's just part of life.
I know, and I feel that fear. I have a 3-year-old boy, and I already think, okay, well, what kinds of conversation am I supposed to be having with him, and I feel the weight of, I need to teach this properly. I want him to be comfortable and know that he can talk to me and we can have conversations about it without it being like, oh, this is so weird. Where I have wonderful parents, but we never even talked about it one time. And I think that's pretty normal for my generation, and especially generations before that. It's like almost nothing was talked about. And so I like what you're saying. Like, we need to make it more normal and comfortable to talk about these things.
And so right now is a perfect time for you to practice. I know you have a little baby. Start practicing with your baby.
Yeah.
Saying things and talking about the body when you're bathing your 3-year-old.
Yeah, I do remember from your class you saying, like, we talk about what each body part is. We never give nicknames to things, and we're like, this is your penis, and this is what these are. And I have done that. I remember I've been thinking about that, is like, teach proper body autonomy from the youngest age.
Yeah.
Help us better understand masturbation. Is it okay if we go into that and talking about that? I feel like in my head, I might be talking to my son about masturbation sooner than I'm talking to him about sex all the way and understanding. Help us define masturbation for me, because I remember taking away some pretty interesting things from your class that I did not know before. And what role does it play in our lives as sexual beings?
These are such important questions. I host the Live Your Why podcast, and last season was season 4, and I have an entire episode on understanding masturbation. It's the most popular episode that I've done over 4 years. So many bishops have listened to it and gotten back with me saying, thank you, this will help me so much in talking with the youth. And so if you really want an in-depth conversation about that, go to Understanding Masturbation on Live Your Why.
Yes.
As far as defining it, I define it as masturbation is self-touch for sexual arousal in selfish ways. And that's very different than learning how your body works. So I am a sex therapist, and I work often with couples, very religious couples, where the wife often has not orgasmed. As a matter of fact, I met with a couple not long ago that 29 years married, 5 children that are grown and out of the house, and she doesn't know what an orgasm is.
Oh my gosh.
It breaks my heart.
She probably doesn't enjoy sex at all.
No, she never has. And we'll talk about this in a minute, about newlyweds and what to expect. But as far as her experience, it's always just been associated with pain from her wedding night forward. And they came for therapy, and the very first thing as a sex therapist, as an intervention, is for a woman to learn about her body. Men, everything is external as far as sexually. They have figured this out by the time they're probably 8 years old. They figured out that this feels good when I do this. And I like doing this. And don't we all like doing things that feel good, right? Young girls, not like that. We have things that are kind of behind some folds in the labia. And so I believe it's really essential for women to understand how their body feels pleasure. And sometimes that takes you learning on your own or touching yourself. Now, I have couples that go either way. Sometimes a woman would prefer to do this alone. And then show her husband what she's learned. Other times women don't feel comfortable with that and would rather have their husbands with them. Either way that feels best to you. You have a responsibility for yourself to learn what feels good to you. We won't talk about the whole clitoral complex here, but there's so much pleasure available to women. Women, in all honesty, are superior sexually to men in our ability to achieve pleasure. Once we've achieved orgasm, multiple orgasms are very possible. The entire clitoral complex is just fascinating to me, how much we're learning about the pleasure that women can have. So I think when you are learning how your body works so that you can help your spouse help you achieve pleasure, I don't call that masturbation.
Right.
Some people might. I call that sexual exploration or sexual understanding, sexual maturity. Because you are responsible to understand this about yourself. You figure out what food you like and don't like. You figure out how you like to wear your hair. You figure out, do I like to tan or do I like to not tan? You know, there's so many things we figure out. This is an important thing to figure out.
I think there's so much value in that. And especially in the beginning. It's obvious from what you were saying, women are supposed to enjoy sex, and we are sexual beings. And I think often it's portrayed in society and in movies and whatever. We just understand it as like, oh, it's something for the man, and it's like what men want. But no, women do too. And part of the reason why it's harder for us is because we have to understand our body, and we really do have to do some of that exploration. So that's
our
good.
husbands need to understand our bodies
1000%.
And they're not going to understand it if we don't. It's really, I can remember a husband one time in therapy said, I just wish that it was like a thermometer on a turkey at Thanksgiving that would just be, and it would be done. But there's not anything like that on a woman's body. It's just really trial and error, and sex is experiential learning. Just the way you learn to ride a bike is by doing it. That's how it is.
And I fear that sometimes newlyweds, and maybe not even newlyweds, people who've been married for years, they're almost uncomfortable with that experimentation. And because it's something that we have not talked about, something that we aren't comfortable with, what advice would you give? Like, I remember, this is maybe a poor example, but I remember when I first got married, like, trying to initiate it felt uncomfortable to me. And like, oh, does that mean like I'm a slut? Because like I'm trying to initiate it and put on lingerie, and like that was uncomfortable at first for me. But it was so important in like putting myself out there to like get to where I'm comfortable, if that makes sense. And I worry some couples might not even take that leap.
Right. Especially if there's a lot of shame or fear associated with sexuality. We learn about sex in our childhood homes. And typically in conservative Christian homes, it's not taught well, like we've talked about. And so the idea of wanting to wear lingerie, of wanting to feel sexy, is that a righteous desire?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I believe it is. Because, well, I'll tell you, my favorite quote is in Jeffrey R. Holland's devotional he gave in the 80s at BYU called Souls, Symbols, and Sacraments. There's one sentence in there. Is so profound, I ponder on it constantly, is that we are never more like our heavenly parents than when we are expressing this certain creative power. Wow.
Yeah, I kind of got the chills when you said that.
I get the chills. And I think this is a good part of being alive. This is a beautiful part of being a woman. So learning to figure out what kind of things feel sensuous, turning into our senses. What are we smelling, seeing, tasting, feeling? Senses are a big part of sensuality. And so having experiences where you're learning, what do I like? What does this taste like? What does this sound like? Figure out what it is for you. And I know that for me, and I'm old, and so maybe this will gross everyone out, but one thing that helps me, because my libido has gone down after I've gone through menopause, which is normal, totally normal. But what helps me is a lot of times I'll need to put lingerie on before I know my husband will be home for a few hours, and just I feel sexy, and it helps me. It's like I'm contemplating sharing this with him, and it does help arouse with my arousal.
Yeah. I don't think that's disgusting, by the way. I think that's great. And I think that's what's beautiful too, is in this stage of life, it's changed a little bit for you guys. And I think that's normal as well. And that's why it's kind of fun, is the exploration continues to happen, and we need to continue to experiment. And I hope, I don't want people to feel ashamed to the point where they're not exploring it and it's not becoming an enjoyable thing for them.
Totally.
So what advice would you give for someone who wanted to increase their sexual confidence?
Well, number one, don't have anyone else in the bedroom but you and your spouse. And that doesn't mean what you actually might think I'm saying. But mostly it's in our minds that we're thinking, oh, if my mother knew that this is what we were doing, or what would my bishop say if he knew this is what we were wearing, or this is how we played, or your mom and your bishop and your young women's leader, they never have been. Don't let them in your bedroom. Come to your bedroom, the two of you, and just rejoice together. I think the more you can make this about creating good energy, it doesn't need to be about orgasm, doesn't need to be orgasm focused. It needs to be about connection, vulnerability, bonding. One of the best things that you can do to start enhancing wanting to make love more is to go back to those early days before you were married and make out like that again. But like your hands off all those other parts, and just it's an intervention I do often in therapy where for a whole week they just need to make out. And they come back.
You're like, you can't have sex.
Exactly, you cannot. And they will always come back and say, oh, Tammy, we had sex.
The suspension is back.
Right. As soon as you kind of get some of that tension where you're your mindset is that this is not allowed,
Right.
It becomes a lot more fun. There's something about being naughty that
Yeah, totally.
Not that this is naughty, but
No.
you know what I mean.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
Really becoming sexual partners, full really ability to fulfill and help one another feel pleasure takes some time. So if it doesn't happen right away, if it seems like you're frustrated because you had hoped by now that this would be better than it is, I want you to just step back and realize that things do take time. Keep trying. And when you have a spouse that is maybe more, if your spouse is more nervous about showing up in different ways sexually, I always ask my couples to remember the widow's mite. That scripture where the Savior and his disciples saw that widow put in the 2 mites, that was all she had. There's times when what your spouse is bringing is all he or she might have that night or that morning, and it has to be enough. And so to graciously receive what's being offered without putting pressure that there has to be more is going to be essential.
Yeah, that's good. That kind of leads me to want to ask a question. Anytime like one of you is initiating and putting yourself out there, don't want to offend, but sometimes you're not in the mood, right? For both of us.
Right.
And is there a best way to reject, but not offend, and to instill like, hey, we're connected, we're confident?
So it's such an important question, and this is one of the big things that I see in therapy, couples feeling, because when you're initiating, you're kind of risking.
Yeah.
Right?
You're putting yourself out there.
Right. And so when that's rejected, it stings. And so your comfort in risking to initiate again decreases.
Yes.
And so I think honor the initiation. It has to be honored that someone's asking. And you don't want this person to ask anywhere else. This is your covenant relationship. And so I have a couple of responses is, hey, give me 20 minutes and talk me into it. Let's just lay together naked and make out for 10 minutes
see what
happens. A lot of people don't know that female sexuality wasn't really researched seriously until 1980. And so that means my mom didn't have any information. A lot of your moms probably didn't have any information to teach you about, because there wasn't information to help us with this. What we've learned, which is so exciting, the first sexual response cycles that were established in 1958 by Masters and Johnson were done on male brains only.
Okay, I remember. I've listened to this podcast. You talk about this.
It's fascinating to me.
Yep.
Women weren't even considered in this.
Which is wild.
It's wild. But this sexual response cycle, unfortunately, is still being taught on college campuses. It is desire, arousal, orgasm, resolution. And we're being taught that that's normal. That's normal for men. What's normal for women is different. Arousal has to take place before desire, then orgasm, and then resolution. So those first 2 parts of the cycle are totally reversed for men and women. And so women need to know they're normal. And there's not something wrong with them. They're not broken if they're not feeling in the mood like that.
Yep.
Just cuddle and make out for 10 minutes. Because usually if you're making out for 10 minutes and then you step back and say, how are you? Do you want to go forward? Most of the time women will now be aroused and have the desire to go forward. Not all of the time. There might be times when, honey, I love that, but I'm still just exhausted. What I need more right now, especially during seasons with new babies, what I need now is a good night's sleep. I love this. What can I do to help you right now?
Yeah, yes.
But I think normalizing that the sexual response cycle is different for men and women, and it's intentional.
Yeah.
It's not a mistake. It's intentional. And when you ponder that, it shows so much love and wholeness that can develop in a marriage relationship.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Like, it's intended for us to be connected
and to learn
for it to happen.
Right, that sometimes that desire is there, and other times for the spouse, arousal has to take place first, but it's something that it's kind of the yin and the yang.
I also think I have friends who I know where they're what we would say the male and in their relationship. And so it can be either way.
Totally.
Right.
It typically is that women are, tend to be low desire, but it's not really low desire. That's what you'll hear.
Would say, yeah.
Yeah, people will say it's low desire. It's just that they haven't become aroused yet.
Yeah.
That's typical. However, in my practice, I would say that probably 25 to 30% of the women in couple relationships I work with would be classified as higher desire.
Okay. So I wonder if the studies are changing that, it's interesting.
It is.
We've talked a lot about how for it to be a good connecting experience, you have to both understand each other and understand the body and what feels good and help you get there. Are there safe places to go to look into what that experimentation looks like?
That's it. I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, I feel like you're the woman who would know.
Honestly, my most popular event are my virtual Making Love retreats. I have one in September, level 1, and then a level 2 in October, and they're so cheap.
What is level 1 versus level 2?
Level 1 is more learning about pleasure, erogenous zones. I teach you about tantric sex, and we delay orgasm. Level 2 is more about understanding sexual fantasy, understanding how our brains work in the sexual exchange. We learn about female ejaculation. So it's a little deeper.
Yeah.
But level 1 needs to really happen before level 2. I don't know anyone else who does this. I know a lot of great people who talk about sex. I don't know a lot of great people who talk about sex in a reverent way that are also really trained in sex therapy.
Yeah.
And so I'll be honest, I think they're the best things to be able to come to, and it's private because you come and I'm teaching was all via Zoom. I'm teaching, but your cameras aren't on. We don't know who's there.
Oh.
You get a room for 48 hours, or you get your kids taken care of and you're home for 48 hours. You come, I teach 3 different times. I give you specific homework to do at the end of each of the sections where I teach. And you work on it together for 6 to 8 hours. Then you come back, you email me any questions, and I spend time responding to all the questions. I never end a retreat unless every question has been answered.
So good.
And so it's
pretty affordable. I was actually looking at it.
I think
before
it's $235.
Yeah.
For I used to do them before COVID. I did them at hotels, and they were a lot more pricey. COVID made it so that I tried this, and so it's
more virtual.
It's virtual, and it's so affordable.
Yeah.
I often tell my couples a session with me costs more than coming to a virtual retreat. One session, 15-minute session.
Yes.
And so I tell couples, you know what would help you more than sitting here with me week after week is to come to this. Let me save you some money.
Mm-hmm. And every question is answered. That's
every
so
question. Good. I will never end a retreat because I think it's so important for couples, good couples, to have good information, accurate information, say in a safe way to get it.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking about. I'm like, there has to be safe ways for us to learn these things. And I know your books are also good resources just to better understand this conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I would love to hear, what advice do you give to those who are engaged and who are preparing to experience sex for the first time?
Yeah. Bottom line is, especially if you are waiting to have sex until you're married, then you've been incredibly careful all along. There is no urgency to have penetrative sex on your wedding night. Why don't you just get in lingerie in front of each other and gaze for a while? Why don't you just go slow? I often give couples the challenge not to have penetrative sex on their honeymoon, but to totally sleep naked together, see what that feels like. You've never done this before.
Yeah.
Kissing naked, oh my, that's exciting. There's just so much to build up.
Getting a shower together, take a bath together.
Right. Like, all those things that we don't do forever. Yep. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to do all of it so fast with penetration. And the reason I say that is I don't have any problem with penetrative. If you have penetrative sex, you're not in trouble. No problem. But women, the way a woman's body is designed is that she has a clitoral complex that needs to fully be engorged with blood prior to her having an orgasm. And that requires a lot of time. It requires time. It requires touch. It requires knowledge. And so the more she's relaxed and able to have penetrative sex with an orgasm involved or not involved with penetration, either one, she's going to have a positive experience with sex. Women have, the research is showing that why women are often the low desire partners is because their first sexual experiences were painful. And pain is registered in the brain as traumatic. And so what happens is they've had this painful experience and they do it again, and their brains remember that it was painful, and so they tighten up. And as they tighten up, they're clenching their entire pelvic floor, which is the body working against itself from relaxing to allow for penetration. And so I can remember so many of my mothers and her generations would say, you just endure it. Isn't that heartbreaking? But I understand why, because they didn't know better. But we know better today. So take time. Let this be, if this is a positive experience for the bride, her interest in sex throughout the marriage will be maintained. If it's painful for the bride, her interest in sex usually lasts less than 6 months.
Oh my gosh, that is so fascinating.
It is. Having this be a positive, warm experience where there's not the pressure she has to do something or she has to orgasm or whatever. This is all just learning, building, just exploring together. But making this a positive experience for the bride will make this forever a positive experience for both the bride and the groom.
Yeah. And I know people in my life who still struggle and don't find enjoyment in sex. And I really am like, wow, what you were just saying makes so much sense. You associate that pain with trauma. And of course it wasn't a traumatic experience, but it was maybe painful, and it wasn't what you expected it to be, right? You want it to be this beautiful, wonderful thing. And I think that was really good advice in the beginning. Start slow.
Go slow. And
that was the joy for us too, is starting slow. Like, just let your hands explore for a while, and like that's fun for the first time, right? And get in the bath. I don't know, that's what we did, and I feel like it really was like a really good first experience. And I think I feel lucky for that. When I hear mostly horror stories from members of our church, which is devastating.
It is devastating, especially when we have such a beautiful theology that is pro-sex.
Yes. Why do you feel that in the church, the culture doesn't match the theology?
I love our church leadership. So let me say this in a way that is loving and kind. They are all older. They grew up in generations where sex wasn't talked about. I don't know. Of course, I have no idea what their experiences have been sexually. But I do know that speaking about sexuality for them is uncomfortable. And I feel like as a church leadership, most people are very immature when it comes to discussing sexuality.
Yeah, I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason why I have this podcast is, okay, where does the culture and the theology not line up? Because I feel this discomfort with the culture, and then I look and I read and I understand and I study, and I'm like, this is beautiful. And sex is essentially that. Like, that's how I feel about this topic. I'm curious, what led you to want to study this and be a sex therapist?
I know, I'm a weirdo.
No,
for my generation.
I am so grateful for you.
Thank you. I love what I do. I'm passionate about it. I remember my mother reading with me when I was 8 years old a little book that was called A Doctor Talks to 5 to 8 year olds. And in it, she explained reproduction. And I was fascinated. I thought, oh my gosh. And I had been taught one of the most important things I'll ever do in life is to be a mother. And so this is how babies are made. And it was just like mind blowing to me. And I turned to her in all my innocence and said, how long does it take? And she says, it takes 9 months. And I said, no, I don't care about that.
Not the baby.
Not the baby. How long does this part take? And she said, about 5 minutes. And I thought, that cannot be right. This is my 8-year-old self. I believe this is a gift I've been given from pre-mortal world. I don't know. But I thought, that cannot be right.
Yeah.
If this is one of the most important things I do in my mortal journey, and it only takes 5 minutes for this to happen, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And so I set about reading everything. My dad was a medical doctor, and I would look in all of his books trying to find anything about sex. I remember as a 10-year-old learning about David and Bathsheba and thinking in Sunday school and thinking, I'm going to learn. So I went home and looked in my scriptures, and David, I think it says he knew Bathsheba, and it's like, that's not helpful.
Like, that's 5 minutes.
That doesn't tell me right. That doesn't tell me anything. And I can remember about 16 years old, I found a romantic novel at the library that I read that had a sexual scene in it. And I remember my heart pounding. I remember I was lubricating, not knowing that's what was happening while I was reading it. And I thought, this is what I'm looking for. This is the information I'm wanting to understand. And from a romance novel.
Yeah.
And so then I went to college at Utah State, and I took my first healthy sexuality class, and I was blown away. I went around aroused for an entire semester.
Oh my gosh.
I wasn't married yet. And I was like, this is so exciting.
Yeah. Yes. That's hilarious.
So that's kind of, I want our theology is that this is a gift. I really believe that when we rejoin our heavenly parents again, one of the first things they will ask us is, how well did you enjoy your body? This is an important part of enjoying our body. I believe that with all of my soul. And I want everyone that has this great, rich theology to truly be able to embrace this wonderful part about being human. So that's why I did what I did.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember you shared that in that little piece where you said Heavenly Father will ask us, did we enjoy our body? That stuck with me. I even shared it on TikTok a few years ago. Really? Because I really agree with you. Like, one of our purposes for being here is to obtain a body. And it's to be enjoyed.
Exactly.
It's to bring joy.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No.
Every primary child, I've served in primary 32 years straight, and every primary child will say, when you ask, why are we on earth? They will say, to get a body. They get it. Somewhere between that and when we're adults or whatever it is, or even teenagers, we start feeling ashamed or uncomfortable or afraid of the things that we're feeling, like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And that we're bad. We're not. We're human, and this is a good energy.
Yeah, I love that For Strength of Youth says, like, our sexual desire comes from God.
I love that too.
That is the way that this is supposed to be taught. Your romance book made me think of a question that I might very much be outing myself with. So I don't know how to keep it in. But I remember whenever we first got married, and I'm in my adult years, and reading some books that have sex scenes in them and thinking, is this wrong? Is this essentially just me watching pornography? And I had to go through my own studies to understand if it was appropriate or not. And of course, I think that's up to each individual to know where their line is. But I've found, like, in some ways it can help me. It brings me closer to my husband. And what would you say to that?
I agree. I think that we talked, remember, about how women need to have arousal before they desire sex. I think reading a romantic novel, that's one way that we become aroused. We become interested. I think that there obviously is a lot of literature out there that I wouldn't want to read, because I've read a lot of things, and there's some things I read and I feel like that doesn't feel right, and then I just put it away. There's other things I read and all it does is make me excited to be with my husband.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I know there will be people that totally disagree with me, and that's okay. We're accountable, each one of us accountable on our own before God for the choices that we make. That's a choice for me, and that's my choice.
Yeah. And I, like you said, I know people disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But
and that's okay.
Yeah. And
that's totally okay.
And I think that's why we have agency to use our own discernment and our own judgment.
I agree. My mother is so embarrassed about what I do.
Really?
And she's so embarrassed about Replenish, my book. She is horrified by it. And it makes me feel a little sad because it tells me a lot about her life and the joy that she chose or didn't feel comfortable enough choosing to claim.
Yeah. To that point, I know there are couples listening to this who don't feel that it is this joy or that it is a strong way to connect with one another. I know that's a big question, but what advice would you give to them if they desire, who doesn't want this in their life?
I would say in understanding couples therapy, the foundation for a good marriage is trustworthiness. A foundation of a marriage is that you trust one another. And I have found when trust is lacking in the relationship, sexual dysfunction is rampant. So if this is something you're not into and it doesn't feel like you really want to risk doing this or for whatever reason, I would really work on building the trust in your marriage. I'll say this over and over again to couples where you have one spouse often who wants to be more explorative, who wants to do more, who is pressuring sometimes the spouse to lighten up and have more sexual fun with me. And I will say to this spouse, you need to do everything you can to build trust, that she can look at you or he can look at you and know you are showing up, that who you are is what's really showing up. And the more that trustworthiness deepens and expands, the more expansive the sexual relationship will naturally start taking place. Trust so look at the trust.
Yep.
And if trust is there, keep enriching that trust, and then do something to read a book together, do something to kind of start the juices flowing, to get your mind working. Some people just don't have any idea what to do.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But you don't need to stay there. Take a step forward and do something. And
our faith can play a role in that. Yeah, be hopeful and be faithful and pray and use Tammy's resources and let God teach you these things because he wants it.
Yeah, and we were created to experience it. There's no way, I don't think there's any way we can look at the female and the male bodies and ever claim otherwise.
Yeah.
One of the ways I think that can help couples in embracing their bodies and understanding that their bodies are good, because we're wanting people to do that, is I have a new book coming out this fall called Your Body and the Plan of Happiness. It is a graphic illustrated novel. It's really for tweens, the tween years.
That's perfect.
To understand sexual arousal, sexual desire, understand why they might feel things sometimes and they don't understand, or to not be ashamed or embarrassed about experiences they might have. It just normalizes sexuality and also teaches accountability for choices that we make sexually with our bodies. I think I can say it's for tweens, but I think it's for everyone. I read it and it touches my heart. I've had so many people proofread it for me, and just had Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. I don't know if you're aware of who she is. Mm-hmm. She's wonderful. She's written a testimonial for it, and she came back. We were on the phone yesterday, and she said, "This is mind-blowing to me. Every member of the church needs this book, no matter what their age is, but to accept the goodness of our bodies and the goodness of sexuality, and to utilize this energy that we have potential to experience for good."
And it's obvious to me that in God's plan, the most crucial parts of God's plan, Satan twists the most.
Mm-hmm. True.
And to me, this is one.
Mm-hmm.
That is so obvious. Everyone sees how it is twisted and skewed to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a testimony to me how crucial it is in God's plan.
Mm-hmm. We always talk about how the plan of happiness or the plan of salvation was all around agency. And yeah, it was. But it was also around sexuality. Because none of this could happen without sex.
Yeah.
None of it could happen without sex. So it's about agency, and it's also about sexuality.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, when does the book come out? Because I want it now.
It's going to print. It just went to print this week. So it's coming.
Okay.
Hopefully in the next month.
Go find Tammy Hill on Instagram. You can have a link to her website and the book when it comes out. I'm sure you'll talk about it a lot on there. So, well, thank you. This has been so good. I think everything that you shared is what I felt like needed to be shared. And it's what I believe to be true as well. So
thank you, Lauren.
I'm so glad you came on to do this.
A pleasure to be here. If you want to ever do something again, just let me know. This has been so fun.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more questions. What I like to do is after an episode, like we discuss it on social media and people share their thoughts, and we might do part 2 and need Tammy back to answer more of our questions.
I will come back anytime because I retired from BYU last year, and so I miss having opportunities to chat like this.
Yes, to teach. You're so good at it.
So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.